let's move on to another story that, I mean, is obviously going to get a lot of discussion, and it's really hard to gather what this will become, because it could be nothing, it could be gigantic. But from today's edition of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, it reads, in what could end up being among the biggest wrestling stories of the year, or a non-story, depending on the end result, Nick Khan has been in talks with New Japan Pro Wrestling about WWE being the exclusive American partner with the promotion. Right now, New Japan has been working with AEW and Impact and has a relationship with CMLL and Ring of Honor, but things have slowed down with those companies since COVID. Obviously, there are a million questions regarding such a deal if it was to happen, and there are no indications where talks are at past they date back to late March or early April, but it would include WWE sending talent and WWE top stars being allowed to work in New Japan if talks go anywhere. And then there's more on top of that, but those are the key notes in the report. So, I mean, Wade, there are people already making their dream cards online. I think it's kind of getting ahead of yourself that, you know, what are the stages of these talks? And the fact that if they're going back to March, early April, the fact is New Japan has been working with other companies. And if this does grow into something, that's huge. But it also could be something where, I mean, this is very unlike WWE, but kind of goes to show you that Nick Khan has a very different vision, and it shows you the adaptability that a Vince McMahon has, that I would liken to Vince McMahon is always going to be in the driver's seat with his hand on the wheel, but it feels like Nick Khan is the GPS of this company.
Oh, I like that analogy.
There you go. I'm trademarking that.
The OnStar of the WWE, Nick Khan. Okay, interesting. Well, it is certainly a fascinating one that I think, you know, has fans either salivating or dreading if it does in fact come true. I think from a strategic perspective, you definitely see the reasoning behind it. And I think, you know, beyond perhaps, you know, if you're Nick Khan wanting to create that more of that maybe sports-like atmosphere attached to the WWE product, of course, it's also cutting off New Japan Pro Wrestling's ties to its other partnerships, primarily AEW. So, you know, New Japan right now, I mean, these talks, from what seems to be, you know, it seems what seems to be discussed have been taking place for a little bit now. But nonetheless, you know, New Japan, I believe, is in a bit of a vulnerable state right now. So you do wonder how much of that might play into further discussions. Certainly, it's a company that's wanted to increase their foothold in the U.S. And obviously, over the past year and a half, that's stalled big time.
Major.
But, you know, is a partnership with the WWE going to help that? Or is it them basically giving that up and saying, hey, we know we're not going to be able to compete with you, but at the same time, we want to be able to make money in the US, and with your help, we can do that. Of course, the other question is, if you're a WWE fan, or if you're not a WWE fan and somebody who's just simply watched, you know, the way that they've been able to integrate their past partnerships and with other companies around the world, you're probably looking at this and thinking, this is not going to be good for New Japan Pro Wrestling. This is not going to be good for somebody like a Kazuchika Okada or whoever. Like, people are joking, oh, Okada on 205 Live. People are making jokes about Kenta, who's just like, you know, spent years trying to get away from that whole thing, and now might find himself back into the system. I mean, of course, if, you know, down the road, if all this happens, their track record of integrating some of this, you know, these talents is certainly questionable. And you would wonder, even if something like this were to occur, how big of an extent this relationship would be. Would it simply be something that was relatively hands off and separate from Raw and SmackDown, like you might see, you know, with, you know, past integrations of New Japan talent in NXT or you know, NXT UK or something like that? What do you think, John?
I mean, when it comes to, like, I think it's impossible to answer any of those questions. I look at it just strictly from the side of, you know, what is in it for each side. And I'd be very curious who initiated these meetings, because, you know, New Japan, you would think just off the hop, if WWE wanted to sit down with you, you would be more than rushing towards taking a seat at that table and taking that meeting. I think that is exponentially so over this past year, where you can see that New Japan, I don't know if needing needing a life raft is an appropriate, metaphor, but they are lost, and a GPS could help them get back to the road, get back to the highway of their destination. And if you're WWE, yes, there's certainly the incentive of having an exclusive relationship with New Japan that is not funneling talent to your competitors. There is, for New Japan, I mean, the idea of, if a Nick Khan could say, we would distribute your content and take a healthy percentage of whatever deal we get, New Japan getting a percentage of an American TV deal, of which, I mean, there would be no one more impactful than a Nick Khan that says, I can sell your product in the US. That becomes very advantageous. When you hear stories of New Japan talent, probably, of the unrest, of a lot of questions, you hear a story like this. Does this give you a bit of a reprieve that let's get through this? And if there's something like this at the end of the tunnel, for some, they may look at this as bad. I think a lot of others, they would be looking at this as, at the very least, some financial stability if there is a clear-cut relationship in any form with WWE. So I would say New Japan, I think they would very much be entertaining this. And with WWE, I don't think we're getting to this point where this story is out there, and if they did not want to be pursuing this in the sense that I think that WWE, if this had been New Japan knocking on their door and they have a courtesy meeting and nothing happens of this, I don't think this is much of anything.
There are other elements at play here too, of course, with like certain rumors of somebody like a Daniel Bryan wanting to test the water, so to speak. I'm sure there are a lot of talents in WWE who are creatively unfulfilled with the style of programming, or maybe simply they just don't have a spot for them right now that might be creatively fulfilled with some sort of working relationship. But I feel, because we've seen WWE's relationships with, Progress, or like, I think that's the biggest concern that maybe a pessimist might have about something like this, is to see the WWE possibly reduce a New Japan Pro Wrestling to the status of a Progress. Just another thing on the WWE network or on Peacock or something. And I don't think that'll be the case. I feel like New Japan is higher profile than either of those. I
really could not see this being a case where WWE just like outright buys or overtakes New Japan completely. Mm-hmm. I just think like that's not going to be in their wheelhouse. Like we heard the example of Nick Khan when he talked about Mexico, that you have these existing leaders in that company in CMLL and AAA. We are not looking to buy a company. He suggested more so like building up our own brand. But again, this could simply be, there is a reason to have a relationship with this company. We can send some of our talent over there back and forth. A guy like Daniel Bryan, it's like that certainly comes to mind immediately because, he brought this very idea up and also qualified it. This was only about a month ago, before the news of his contract came out, that he was pushing for something like this, but it didn't sound very confident that it was going in that direction. So again, there's so many questions to this that a story like this, it's going to breed so much speculation. And I think Dave outlined it pretty well. This could be one of the biggest stories of the year. It could also end up being nothing. And 6 months from now, we look back and say, yeah, remember that week when WWE and New Japan was everyone was fantasy booking.
One last thing is, what do you think this says about WWE and Triple H's efforts for global localization?
I think that it's, I still feel like that is going to be a major priority. This would, I guess with this one, it's like, I see this being a different deal than like what they're trying to cultivate in India, which I think moving forward, I think they want to have a performance center in India and really build up their own brand from the ground up. I would not look at Japan as a territory where I would want to start from scratch. As a foreign-owned company. I mean, we saw the difficulties of the UFC trying to get into Japan, years ago. So I think that would be where you have pro wrestling so ingrained in the DNA of that country. I think it becomes that much tougher for WWE to start from scratch. That this would be a better inroads into Japan of kind of talent exchanges, an exclusive working relationship, and you have the fact that it can siphon your talent, or at least the New Japan talent, in a one-way direction with WWE, and you're not sending them to other companies.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. Maybe we'll hear more about it soon.